You are listening to Radio Dialogue. My name is Zanzel Ndebele. As Cooksman has just indicated, in the studio with me, I have lawyers from I have Tandi and Tanaka. They're going to introduce themselves and tell us from the organizations that they work for. And we are then also going to discuss the issue of the 16 days of activism, but also looking at the special emphasis on women's rights, looking at the new constitution. Welcome to Radio Dialogue.
Thank you.
Normally they say ladies first, but today I'll start with the gentleman. You can introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. My name is Tanaka Mukanyi. I am a legal practitioner practicing with Dube Partners and Partners. I am also a member of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights.
My name is Thandekile Ngwenya. I am a legal practitioner by training, but I focus on women's rights and gender equality issues. Currently, I'm an independent consultant and a member of Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights.
Okay, I'll start with you. Maybe looking at the issue of, people are talking about the 16 days of activism. Briefly, what is the 16 days of activism?
Okay, 16 days of activism is the period that starts from the 25th of November, which is the International Women's Day, up to the 10th of December, which is the International Human Rights Day. It ends on a Human Rights Day, and that's very symbolic, so that women's rights issues are also viewed as human rights issues. This is the time when we, as organizations, as individual women, we really focus on the different forms of gender-based violence, which is really violence that one suffers either because they are a woman or because they are a man.
Yeah, looking at the 16 days of activism and also at maybe generally the statistics when you come to Zimbabwe, what are the challenges, especially because now we know that after the adoption of the new constitution, we now have 50-50 in terms of representation. That was the idea. Some called it the zebra and so forth and so on. Do you think Zimbabwe has done a lot in terms of promoting women? And also, what are the other challenges that we still find?
In terms of promoting women, there is a lot that has been done, and I must say on paper, yes. But in terms of implementation and in terms of those laws and policies translating to reality for most women, there is still a lot that needs to be done. Looking, for instance, at the Domestic Violence Act, which really is one of the pieces of legislation that protects women against violence, there is still a lot that needs to be done in terms of awareness raising, in terms of making sure that it's resourced, and also in terms of changing people's attitudes so that they can use the law. Just yesterday, we're talking to a group of women and men celebrating the 16 days of activism, and there's still so much resistance in terms of people using the Domestic Violence Act because they don't understand that it protects everyone. There is a perception that it's there to protect women, and yet it's there to protect anyone who's likely to suffer from violence.
Tanaka, looking at the new constitution, what are the new rights that we didn't have, that we now have in the new constitution?
I would say, first and foremost, that the new dispensation has ushered various new pieces of laws that are protecting women in terms of the instruments that have been put in the constitution. And I would want to point out on some of them. That is, firstly, we would want to look at Section 17 of the Constitution, which basically provides for gender balance as a national objective. And that gender balance is even placed in the founding values of the Constitution, which was a scenario that was not there previously. And then Section 26 also looks at the marriage rights in respect of protection of women, especially upon dissolution of marriages and inheritance laws as well. And then Section 56 looks at that it provides for equality and non-discrimination in political spheres as a fundamental human right and freedom. So you are looking at a situation whereby now women are now put at par with their male counterparts. We also look at Section 8, which provides that every woman now has full and equal dignity of a person that is with men. And this includes equal opportunities in political spheres and political participations. And then also 104 looks at the issue of the president having to be guided per se to the consideration of gender balance in appointing ministers or deputy ministers. We also have various other issues that are also incorporated in the constitution. Basically, we have the entrenchment of guardianship rights that are now women now can now access that right, which was a struggle before. And the issues of customs or traditional practices that were actually disadvantaging women, those are now void because of their inconsistencies with the founding values of the constitution.
He presents a situation whereby it looks like our new constitution is very, supportive, very, to the point when it comes to the issues of women's rights. But looking at the reality, how is that constitution then translated to reality? If someone was to walk into police station today and say, I've been beaten up by my man or my woman, such kind of issues, and also when you have the problems of inheritance, how easy is it for this new constitution to be implemented?
I think in terms of implementation, as women, we still see a lot of challenges. Like, for instance, he mentions the section that speaks to issues of gender balance in all spheres of life. And we already know from the recent appointments that were made that where the state could have ensured that there is gender balance, there is still very few women in those positions. If you look at the cabinet, for instance, if you look at other key positions. And then when you come down in terms of looking at the services by the police and also even at the courts, there's been efforts to establish what is called the victim-friendly unit, which really focuses on cases of domestic violence, violence against women, and all those. But the challenge is that not every police station has a trained victim-friendly officer. And secondly, in most cases, the people that go to the stations seeking the service, some of them do not even know that they have to look for a victim-friendly officer, and the environment at the church office is not very friendly. So sometimes they go there wanting to make a report and end up not making those reports because they have to report at the church office first. And also because in most cases, cases of violence involve intimate partners, and women in most cases are shy to speak about these issues at the church office. So if only the victim-friendly office could be made easily accessible, and not just in the cities, but even in rural communities, it would be a lot easier for the women.
If you are just joining us, we are on Radio Dialogue and we are talking about the 16 days of activism, looking at the new constitution as well. You are free to participate. You can call us on 0808-0091. This is a toll free, so imali yako ayidliwa iphone indaba. Ungafona ke ubuze ogqitha lapho ukuthi kuyini okuhluphayo siyakhanya into ze-inheritance. As we have said, we have talked about domestic violence, and we have talked about basically the equality when it comes to men. Tanaka, men have always been complaining now that the new constitution says only men are going to be hanged and women are not going to be hanged. I mean, talking about equality, do you think this is a good thing?
Well, I would want to be objective and say that, you see, when rights are being afforded to, if we speak of equality, then it should be a blanket approach whereby everyone then should be equal and should be subjected to the same conditions and principles in terms of the law. So I think, men ordinarily have a right to complain in that respect, because that is discrimination on its own. Why should we have a constitution that gives rights, a special preference to women who are being advised, or who are being given that equality right, and then that same right is not being given to their male counterparts? But I believe it's because of the history, where we are coming from, because women have always been at a disadvantage. But also now, if we look at these rights that have been ushered in by the new constitution, it is now up to the commitment of government to implement these rights. As my colleague has indicated, that the problem is basically centered on resources. Because resources are now the derogation in the constitution, whereby there is a clause at every given turn that in terms of the available resources, So if there are no available resources, then ordinarily it means people will not be able to access these fundamental rights and freedoms.
Maybe let's hear from a women's point of view, the issue of death sentence. I mean, what's your take from the women's movement?
I think from the women's movement side, we have to understand the history behind having that clause in the constitution to say who is affected most and who are the perpetrators of crimes that require that someone be given a death penalty. But in terms of principles of equality, it really is not fair, because on one hand, as the women's movement, we really want to be treated equally with men, and from that perspective, I believe that is not a progressive clause. And also in terms of modern day society and how people get punished, I doubt if we achieve much by giving men the death penalty. What does it do? Because it doesn't give this person a chance to reform. It doesn't rehabilitate the person. So for me, it's one of those clauses that are there, which from the face of it seem to be benefiting women, but in reality it doesn't. Actually, it takes back the fight around equal treatment.
So looking at the 16 days of activism, looking at the program, what are some of the activities that people can expect during this particular time? Are there any arranged activities in Malawi?
This is the time when organizations and individuals really go out of their way to raise awareness on gender-based violence, to highlight even the extent and magnitude of gender-based violence. Like, for instance, there is a research that was done by the Ministry of Women's Affairs and Gender Links.
Someone was on the call there. I don't know what happened. You can continue.
For instance, there is was done by the Ministry of Women's Affairs and Gender Links, which showed that 68% of women have in their lifetime suffered gender-based violence. And in the same research, about 48% of men that responded admitted to having committed acts or perpetrated violence in their lifetime. So during this period, this is the time when we are raising awareness. So various organizations have activities that are specifically targeted at raising awareness around gender-based violence, the types that are the rape, physical abuse, emotional abuse. And secondly, it's also the time to call out to men who are mostly perpetrators of violence to really take a stand and do something to ensure that they stop perpetrating violence against women. And this is also the time when we call upon government to do something to ensure that the laws and the policies that are there to protect women against violence are implemented and are also resourced, because at the end of the day, it doesn't benefit women much to have a law that's not resourced. So those are some of the activities. So it's really a time when we're also calling for solidarity from different angles of society to speak with one voice against violence against women.
Yeah, as we said, you are on Radio Dialogue, and today we are talking about 16 days of activism. I know the program is, we are speaking in English, but we have vunyelwa ukuthi ngawufona ukhulume ngesindebele kumbe ngesishona silakho ukuthi kuncede, because kwesinye isikhathi abantu bazathi njengoba sebekhuluma ngesingisi kanti manje thina ogokwezindlini siza kuthini uthani ngesishona kuthiwa unofona totahorisana azvinetsi tinogona kusanganisa chishona nechindebele zvofamba. So this is where we are talking about, issues to do with women's rights, but other rights as well that are necessarily looking at women's rights, but equally looking at the 16 days of activism, where people are encouraged to observe or celebrate our diversity, but also looking at the issue of equality, because we know Tanaga domestic violence is one of the issues that is a problem, either in the homes or sexual violence at the workplaces. Do you think our society will get a time when they will see men and women equally, and also men and women, because we know statistically it's men who are always beating up women, although we are always trying to say sometimes there are other women who beat up men. Do you think there will be a time when men will accept and acknowledge that domestic violence is wrong?
Yeah, obviously, because the first issue is that if laws are made, if the legislators legislate and they shelve the legislation in their cabinets, then we are not getting anywhere. Because the basic requirement is awareness. If people are made aware of these laws, especially the Domestic Violence Act, is put to the people, I mean, if awareness is raised so that people can know what is happening, and also if the courts can also interpret and apply the required punishments, then that will also raise awareness in a way, so that at least it will come a time whereby people will know that doing this is wrong. Or if government or would avail resources so that these awareness campaigns are done, because the issue is when non-governmental organizations want to raise awareness, there is a tendency of trying to stifle these organizations, and that brings down the noble objective that is being legislated, or that is coming with these particular laws. But fortunately, definitely and positively, I believe that a time will come whereby people will treat each other equally and observe this equality we are talking about.
One of the issues where the issue of equality has always been talked about is the issue of, there is the prevalence of HIV and AIDS. And we have always had programs where omama bathi khona, it's difficult ukuthi nxa usendlini uthi kubaba let's go and test. And sometimes it's difficult for umama nxa sihambe watesta etshele ubaba. She gets beaten up for saying that you know what, we are HIV positive, or the men would not be in denial and all those kind of things. What do you think can be done to make sure such issues are really talked about openly, and people know that they can walk in a New Start Center as a couple, test positive, but still live their normal life?
It's really about accepting HIV and AIDS as a disease that can affect anyone. It's also understanding that women find themselves in a position where even if they do not want to go for an HIV test, once they are pregnant, they have to. And at the end of the day, they get to know their HIV status even before the men. And also because generally women go to the clinics more than I think. So for me, it's about raising awareness and having both men and women understand that HIV is a health issue, and the earlier one gets tested, it's easier for them to start accessing treatment. It's actually to their benefit. But also doing away with the attitudes and perceptions, as well as the stigma that still surrounds issues of HIV and AIDS. Because there's issues of judgment, there's issues around who has brought it in the home, who got it first. Because as a woman, if you get tested first, the attitude is you got to know first, and so you got it first. And also there is a power relations issue in terms of the woman being able to convince the man to go for an HIV test. The question usually that would come is, what have you been doing for you to want us to be going for an HIV test? Or why do you want to go for an HIV test to start with? So those are some of the issues. There is still a lot of work that still needs to be done, especially with men, so that they can also be encouraged to go for a test. And in terms of societal attitudes, issues around blaming each other and pointing fingers, both sides, for men and women, I think there's still a lot that needs to be done.
Okay, coming to the one you mentioned, one of the issues that are in the new constitution, that is the issue of inheritance. And we know that normally, because we live in a patriarchal society, Zimbabweans have always been having that problem that if a man dies, the relatives come and grab everything. Do you think the new constitution is going to address some of these issues where we have seen women losing property to relatives of their husband?
Yeah, I think the new constitution addresses that on paper. It is now in respect of the implementation, because you would understand and you would agree with me that the most vulnerable person when is the female counterparts. That's the female spouse. That is the most vulnerable, especially when there is this issue of inheritance, because a number of relatives are coming in and she's the one who's mourning. She's not herself at that particular time. And so the constitution tries to protect such a spouse in respect of that. But now it all depends on the implementation. How is this fundamental right going to be implemented? So if still there are no resources, then that right is going to exist on paper. So I would want to leave it to the powers that be, that is the government. It has an obligation to make sure that such protection is fully protected, so that we don't have a scenario whereby still it's women and children who suffer at the end of the day.
As we move towards the end of our program, I want to ask you, there might be someone out there, only problem, and who is whether their rights have been violated by the police or the family at home, and they need the help of Zimbabwe lawyers human rights. What can they do? Where do they go?
Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, it has branches within the width and breadth of the country. Here in Bulawayo, they are situated at Barclays Building, and they offer services for free in respect of human rights issues. So I think in any city you can access Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights.
Okay, Tandegile, what can you say to men and the women as we celebrate the 16 days of activism? Now, what's your message to the people of Zimbabwe, basically?
Okay, I think for me, the statistics show that gender-based violence is such a problem, and it's such a violation of human rights, especially for the women who are victims in most cases. So as we celebrate the 16 days of activism, I call upon every man and woman not to commit violence, not to condone violence, and to also speak out against gender-based violence. Not just during the 16 days of activism, but throughout the year. But this is just the time where we are amplifying the voice against gender-based violence. So don't commit, don't condone, and speak out against gender-based violence.
Tanaka, what's your message to the people?
Well, I would want to urge people to come out in the open without fear or favor, especially where such rights are being violated. And in terms of the Constitution, anybody can approach a court for the enforcement of these rights, as long as you are aware that there is a right that is being violated. You can approach a court on behalf of somebody who does not have the capacity to do so. So people should come out in the open and expose this kind of unwanted practice that is bedeviled our society.
Thank you very much for sharing with us information on the new constitution as well as the 16 days of activism. That was Tanaka and Tandegile talking about what the new constitution says when it comes to rights, and also giving us some highlights about the 16 days of activism, what it's all about, and what basically is going on during these days. From me, Zanzel and Devele, have a nice day.